Remember back in the late 2000s and early 2010s when Sonic fans online were floating around the idea that Sonic X might get a fourth season? I do, and I was always disappointed that it never got one. In retrospect, Sonic X wasn't really that good of a show in the first place, and it didn't really deserve a fourth season. But you know what? That's precisely why I think it should get one. In recent years, tons of fantastic cartoons have been getting rebooted. But in my opinion, it's not shows that were already well received that should be rebooted. It's the mediocre ones, the ones that had a good concept but never got a chance to shine. That makes Sonic X a perfect candidate for a reboot. And with SEGA referencing Sonic X in some of their newer games, I think now is the prime opportunity to resurrect this canon. So in this video, I'll give my take on how I personally would do it if SEGA let me be the main writer for it. But before we get into that, some updates on my personal life. In my Sonic X Shadow Generations review, I told you guys I was going to be doing some army training that was going to limit my ability to make and upload videos for the next few months. That training has since ended, but I'm about to undergo an even longer training, which will further slow down content on this channel. I do apologize, but I promise I'll push out some videos as soon as life slows down a bit for me. So without further ado, let's get started. This season would not be called Sonic X Season 4. If we called it that, some fans would probably be disappointed at anything changing about the show between Season 3 and 4, from the animation, to the music, to the voice acting, etc., and they'd say it failed to live up to Sonic X's legacy. No, this would be a spin-off called Shadow X. If you remember in the final episode of the Meta X saga, Shadow was killed off. Dark Oak had been defeated, so in his rage he tried to force the Planet Egg to release all its energy, destroying himself along with everyone else. Super Shadow then punched Super Sonic away and used Chaos Control to freeze time in the area surrounding the Planet Egg at the moment of its explosion, thereby sacrificing himself to save everyone else. However, a deleted scene briefly hints that Shadow might have actually survived somehow and is now living back on the planet Cascade. So in this season, the story would begin by recollecting the events from the final battle with Dark Oak from Shadow's point of view. Having drained his energy from using Chaos Control, Shadow blacks out and is badly injured from being at ground zero of the explosion. But, in a stroke of luck, the Cascade Resistance had been on their way to the fight. Of course, this fight had been over by the time they arrived, but they found Shadow unconscious, drifting through space. And so they take him on one of their ships and back to Cascade, where they nurse him back to health. During his time on Cascade, there would be a scene where Shadow visits Molly's grave. When Shadow regains his strength, he decides he wants to go back home, so the Cascadians ask him what planet he's originally from. And if you remember in Season 3, Shadow doesn't remember anything about his past. But I would consider the fact that he's from Earth to be a semantic memory rather than an episodic one. So I can buy that he would tell the Cascadians that he's from the planet Earth. So somehow or another, their top scientists are able to build some kind of device like the one Chris Thorndike built in order to get Shadow back to his home planet. They would power this device using the 7 Chaos Emeralds, which Shadow still had with him from his fight against Dark Oak. And this would happen either at or shortly before the time Dr. Eggman sent Chris back to Earth, since, you remember, the entire reason travel between the two universes was possible was due to a potentially once-in-a-lifetime dimensional intersection, or I don't friggin' know, dude. So Shadow gets sent back to Earth. Meanwhile, Dr. Eggman is sending Chris home on the rocket that he built for him. But, plot twist, Dr. Eggman never meant to do Chris a favor. He was just using him as a guinea pig for this new interdimensional travel technology he had just created for his egg fleet. So, right when Chris is rocketed off, he flies in his Eggmobile into his final fortress, his latest battleship that he built to replace the Grand Egg Imperial that was destroyed in Season 2. As he leaves, he announces to Sonic and his friends that he's abandoning their world and focusing his conquest on a planet where Sonic won't be able to get in his way. But he makes sure to have the Egg Fleet carpet bomb Sonic's hometown as a farewell gift. Deco and Boku ask him what he plans to do on Earth, and Eggman explains that during his time there, He learned about some ancient deities like Solaris and Dark Gaia, and wanted to find a way to harness their energy and take over the world. Or something along those lines. So Shadow and Eggman are back on planet Earth, right at the moment the interdimensional crossover ends, thereby leaving them there permanently. Once on Earth, Shadow realizes he needs to get back to his life, but he can't do that because he doesn't remember anything about his life. So he starts trying to learn about his past. Shortly after this, the Black Arms invade Earth and start wreaking havoc. From here on, the story would be a loose adaptation of the game Shadow the Hedgehog. Which path would he be taking, you may ask? Well, first he would join forces with Black Doom, since he claims to know the story of his past, and is willing to exchange this information with him in return for the 7 Chaos Emeralds. Don't ask how he knows about the 7 Chaos Emeralds, because we will get to that later. Just like in the original series, the device that transports our protagonist across space and time has the effect of separating the Chaos Emeralds. Here's where the emeralds would be found. The blue one would be discovered by the Westopolis City Police. The city would then decide to use it as an unlimited supply of clean energy for the locals, housing it in their local power plant. I'd probably include an establishing scene where maybe a young couple who recently moved in are commenting on how wonderful it is to live in a city where the electricity is free. The yellow one would have been discovered by the CIA. Remembering the events from the original series, they would immediately recognize the Emerald's capabilities and would store it in a secret underground facility in Langley, Virginia. The gray one would be discovered by Dr. Eggman while he's constructing his new base. Now, I wasn't entirely sure how to deal with Eggman's base in Chris's world. In the original series, it was really simple. His base was simply transported onto an island in Chris's world, and he used that base to construct his flying fortress for the event that his ground base was destroyed. But in this anime, it would be the opposite. He would be flying into Chris's world with a giant flying armada, and this armada would obviously have to be stationed somewhere. So I had one of two ideas. One, he could set up his base on Prison Island. I figured this would be an easy pick since the prison was destroyed, and the Sonic X organization probably would have been disbanded after Sonic went back to his own world. I only hesitate because giving Eggman yet another island fortress might come across as cliché. The other idea I had was Eggman comes in masquerading as a wealthy oligarch from another country who migrates to the US, buys up a section of Central City, and turns it into the affluent Night Babylon. On the surface, Night Babylon appears to be a tourist attraction for wealthy elites, complete with clubs, bars, casinos, and burlesque shows. In reality, it's all a front. To bring a taste of reality, I would include a scene in an episode where the mayor of Central City confronts the fake businessman about how, while he's happy to see that he's brought life to the city, he's concerned about all the employees of his businesses being robots, since the alien invasion has caused massive unemployment. The poser would then point out that, while many people are without jobs, his machines allow him to keep his prices low, which is good for the city's economy. He then makes a compromise with the mayor to hire a handful of human workers to help mitigate the unemployment crisis, to which the mayor reluctantly agrees. The red one would be discovered by some kind of foreign terrorist organization. It wouldn't be a real-life one, since I think that would hit a little too close to home, and I wouldn't even specify what their goal was. Just some generic, Asiatic-looking group of bad guys. They would want to use the Emerald to create a weapon of mass destruction to advance their cause, and Gun would use them more or less as an excuse to invade other countries and seize the Emeralds by force if necessary. The Cyan one would be discovered in a country that is a close ally with the US. Maybe a member of NATO, or maybe Japan to appeal to the Japanese audience. It doesn't really matter. The green one would be discovered by a country that is hostile to the US, while the pink one would be discovered by a neutral power. Or vice versa, doesn't matter. Gun would justify launching an attack on the hostile power by saying they might use the Chaos Emeralds to harm the US, like the terrorist group would have. but invading the neutral one, who simply didn't want to give it over to Gun, would be harder to justify. The point of this would be to show that Gun is not a completely benevolent force, even if on the outside they appear to be the quote-unquote good guys. Shadow would then go on to massacre Gun's forces in Westopolis.
Shadow, did you just murder that gun soldier?
It wasn't murder. It was a 97th trimester abortion.
That just sounds like murder.
I thought you were pro-choice.
Oh no, are you pro-life?
Of course not.
Oh, thank God.
I'm not pro-anything.
What?
I'm anti-life and anti-choice.
Oh, Jesus, why do I hang out with you?
Yes, but would stop himself upon seeing a familiar face there. An injured Chris Thorndike, now 18 years old and a recent recruit as a gun pilot/engineer due to his inventive genius. Chris would be a source of reprieve throughout the course of the show. While Shadow would spend most of the show acting morally repugnant, or at least morally gray, on behalf of whomever he happened to be siding with at the time, Chris would be there to remind Shadow that he's a good person at heart, and try to convince him to stop being this way. Even after bringing Chris to safety for the first time, Shadow would continue to follow Black Doom, much to Chris's discontent. Black Doom would command Shadow to infiltrate the CIA's mainframe, housed in the George Bush Center for Intelligence. This would disable the security measures in place that were protecting the Yellow Chaos Emerald. Upon retrieving it, Shadow would then give it to Black Doom, who would use it to power his flying fortress. Shadow asks why Black Doom needed this fortress, and Black Doom explains it was to fight against the flying armada that had been deployed against them. Black Doom then sends Shadow aboard the airship, leading the armada in order to kill the commander. Upon boarding, Shadow recognizes the commander as Dr. Eggman, and he's aboard his flying fortress. Shadow, of course, already remembers Eggman from their time in outer space, and he's surprised to see him back on Earth. Eggman, likewise, is surprised to see Shadow is alive. Shadow knows Eggman knows about his past, and Eggman agrees to share it with him if he delivers the rest of the Chaos Emeralds to him, reminding Shadow of how he demanded that from Eggman when they first met on Prison Island. This triggers a flashback in Shadow's mind, and it builds a level of trust with Eggman. Shadow agrees, and Eggman commands the Egg Fleet to tactically retreat. Black Doom witnesses this and takes it to mean Shadow has successfully deterred Eggman's forces, not knowing Shadow actually betrayed him. When the CIA discovers the Yellow Chaos Emerald has been stolen, they notify the President. I'm not sure if the President would be the same one as the one from the original series. I mean, in theory, it's possible he got reelected in the 60 years after Sonic and the others went back to their own world, but his kid-friendly persona from the original series might be out of place in a story with darker tones. Honestly, it probably doesn't matter. For all intents and purposes, this guy would be the same character as before. The President would advise his UN ambassador to call an emergency UNGA meeting to address the alien invasion. At the meeting, the UN ambassador would propose a resolution demanding that any member state that discovered a Chaos Emerald within its borders must deliver it to Gun, since they are the most powerful militia in the world, and only they can be trusted to guard the Chaos Emeralds from the invaders. Many foreign ambassadors object, claiming that Gun only serves American interests. In the end, the vote narrowly passes in favor of the resolution. However, despite passing, some of the countries that have found Chaos Emeralds refuse to relinquish them, and instead keep them for their own purposes. Dr. Eggman would learn from the news that the Cyan Chaos Emerald was discovered in a country with close relations to the United States, and was planning to give it over to the President so that he could give it to Gun. Eggman sends Shadow aboard the President's airship so that when he gets the Emerald, he can steal it. Now, I was considering adding a scene in which Shadow confronts the President himself in private, recognizing him as the leader of the force who, 56 years ago, ruined his life. Obviously, he wouldn't remember the details, but he'd know that much at this point. Then, after a brief exchange, Shadow would murder the President and take the Chaos Emerald. Now, this might cross the line of what SEGA would allow Shadow to do, but but I think it would satisfy that itch for morbidity that some Sonic fans desire to see from Shadow, instead of the melodrama they currently push as a character who steals popcorn from babies. Another problem is I think generally in TV and movies, the President of the United States is meant to be this figure on which the country stands or falls. If the President is killed, it's supposed to be understood that America has capitulated. So I would probably want to get a second opinion on whether or not to include this. My story would work either way. If he's killed, then the Vice President would take his role in the story. I would portray the VP as incompetent and corrupt compared to the President, clearly not someone who can be relied on in a time of crisis. In fact, in his first appearance, he wouldn't even be in Washington. He'd be at a gathering of wealthy elites in a foreign country, bragging about how now that the President's dead, he's the new leader of America. At this time, a Secret Service agent would approach him with a laptop. He'd get all annoyed at the agent for bothering him at the party, but when he viewed the laptop, he would be shocked to see a video of Washington burning to the ground. Black Doom's voice would be heard, gloating about how now that the Black Arms have laid waste to the US Capitol, the entire chain of command has been eliminated. All that remains is the President and the gun commander, and the last of the human resistance will be defeated. The Vice President goes on the news and announces to the public that, in response to the destruction of Washington, he is declaring martial law nationwide until the alien invasion has been repelled. Gunn quickly proves to be a less than noble ruling authority. Gun soldiers show little regard for the rights of the citizens, openly harassing them, looting stores for supplies, and using excessive force to make them do what they want. These scenes would be used to cast Gunn in a more negative light, which will be more important later on. Meanwhile, Dr. Eggman and his lackeys would celebrate Shadow's success in bringing them the Chaos Emerald. Shadow, not being the party type, would probably just wander off somewhere else on the ship, and maybe Bokun gets sad that he doesn't want to have any cupcakes or something. However, Shadow would eventually stumble upon a secret chamber on the base, full of exact replicas of himself. Eggman would catch him in here, and Shadow would question him on it. Eggman would then, quote-unquote, admit that Shadow isn't actually Shadow at all, but an imperfect clone with distorted memories of Shadow's past. I'm switching this up from the original android explanation in the game because I think that one severely insults Shadow's intelligence. It is ridiculous to think that Eggman could realistically convince Shadow that he's an android. He breathes, he has a heartbeat, he can feel pain, and he can know just from touching his own body that he's not made of metal. But the clone thing would be a lot harder to falsify. I would just have Eggman refer to his Shadow clones as, quote, Shadow androids, so as to imply they're soulless automatons who have no purpose other than to do his bidding. While we're talking about him, I want to go over Eggman's characterization in this show. Eggman wouldn't be so much the villain as a comic relief character. In a sense, he would be the anti-Shadow of Shadow X. You see, Sonic has always been a very light-hearted series. The characters are colorful and cartoony looking, and they always just want to have fun. Knuckles and Espio are the most serious characters, but even they have their own quirks. Knuckles with his bad temper, and Espio having to put up with Vector's antics. As it should be, since these games and cartoons are primarily for kids. But Shadow isn't like the rest of them. He's dark and gritty. He's like a real-world adult in a fantasy world of kids. So making this guy the star of the anime, we're going to see a much different tone for the story. Obviously not HBO-type stuff, but certainly not for kids either. And that's where Eggman would come in. Sure, he would be one of the bad guys who wants to take over the world, but he would be upstaged by the Black Arms, who would be the absolute evil in the series. One thing I would change in the anime in comparison to the game is how the conflict between Dr. Eggman and the Black Arms would begin. In the game, he got angry that the Black Arms were destroying the city because he had intended to rule over it, so he sent his forces out to fight them. This makes no sense whatsoever. This is the guy who unleashed a god of destruction to destroy Station Square so he could open up a theme park on top. In the anime, he would actually start by proposing an alliance with the Black Arms against the humans. Basically, he would offer to physically enhance the Black Arms using cybernetics, and in return, he would get to rule as world governor on their behalf. However, the Black Arms would reject the alliance, claiming they have no need for one. This would establish Eggman as just as much the enemy of the Black Arms as Gun, and this would be the reason he sent his Egg Fleet after Black Doom's Flying Fortress in the first place. Shadow would also eventually find Eggman's E-Series robots in another area of the Final Fortress, all in standby mode. It would be explained that these had been additional robots he built to find Froggy back in Season 2, but abandoned after E-102 Gamma found him. Shadow would power one of them on, E-123 Omega. When he does, he immediately finds Omega has a vendetta against Eggman for having abandoned him and putting him in storage. Shadow begins to fight him to protect Eggman. Throughout their fight, Omega tries to convince Shadow that, even though Eggman created him, he'll abandon him the moment he's no longer useful, just like he did to him. Omega's words would cause Shadow to hold back, and in the end, he just disables Omega rather than outright destroying him. When he returns to Eggman, he finds him installing the Cyan Chaos Emerald inside his Egg Breaker, a giant battlesuit he plans to use to destroy the Black Arms. He then goes on a megalomaniacal rant about how once he's eliminated the Black Arms, he'll destroy Gun and conquer the world. Shadow is disgusted by Eggman's selfishness, and silently leaves Dr. Eggman's base to go on a walk outside. While outside, he sees the world around him vanish, and Black Doom appears. Black Doom notes Shadow's troubled expression and expresses his frustration with him for helping the enemy. As an incentive to get Shadow back on his side, he decides to reveal Shadow a piece of his memory, the truth of what happened on Space Colony Arc 56 years ago. Now, Shadow doesn't think this is a real memory, but he accepts it as the story of what happened to the real Shadow. During the vision, Black Doom notes how humans sacrifice their own when overcome by greed, just like how Gun killed Maria. Shadow remembers Dr. Eggman's rant about taking over the world, and is then overcome with grief, having been created by a madman for no other purpose than to fulfill his evil purposes. He then decides to be like Omega and turn against his master. First, he turns Omega back on and agrees to help him betray Eggman. Then, just as Eggman prepares to confront the Black Arms in his new battlesuit, Shadow and Omega stop him. They have a big fight, which ends with Shadow removing the Cyan Emerald from the Egg Breaker and taking it for himself. Now, I don't know how common this is in anime, but in Oreimo, there's a good non-canonical ending and a bad canonical ending. I would like this anime to have two endings as well, but I would have the good ending be the canonical one, for obvious reasons. The ending would be determined by what Shadow does next. In the bad ending, Shadow is completely overcome by rage, which he directs not just towards Eggman, but towards all of humanity. He and Omega murder Eggman in a similar fashion to how they do in the neutral ending in the game. Shadow then goes on to collect the remaining emeralds, except for the red one, which Gun seizes from the terrorist group. In the final episode, Shadow makes his last stand in Washington, D.C. The Vice President, who has since taken charge, is at the heart of the Gun Fortress. He's being protected by Chris Thorndyke's mech, the Diabolon. When Shadow reaches where the VP is hiding, Chris confronts him inside the Diabolon. Shadow makes some big speech about how worthless the human race is, and tries to get Chris on his side. And Chris, meanwhile, makes one final effort to unearth the humanity in Shadow's heart. And he almost succeeds. But Shadow manages to throw it all away, telling Chris that if he gets in his way of killing the VP, he'll destroy him too. Chris is heartbroken, but realizing the Shadow he knew is gone, he tells Shadow that he won't hold back. I would want for this to be a very tear-jerking scene, since it shows the last sentiments of the two characters have for one another withering away. In the end, Shadow would prevail and pull the last Chaos Emerald out of the Diabolon. Chris would then ask Shadow what he was planning to do now that he has all 7 Chaos Emeralds. Shadow would answer that he is going to bring order and justice to the humans by obliterating the entire planet, just like in the pure evil ending of the game. After that, he would laugh maniacally and turn into Super Shadow. And the last few minutes of the episode would show him flying country to country, continent to continent, annihilating everything that exists. And when I say everything, I mean like in the same way Omni-Man destroyed the planet Flaxan in Invincible. Like Earth is becoming a dead planet. I know in the dark ending of the game it was stated he was going to use the Chaos Emeralds to power the Eclipse Cannon to destroy the world, but come on, this would be way more badass. I think I'd leave it up to the viewer to decide whether Black Doom would be happy about this or not. In the game, it wasn't really clear what Black Doom's goal was. In some paths, he'd talk about how he was going to destroy the planet, and in others, he would merely want to conquer it. In this show, I think I'd have it where Black Doom demands the world leaders submit to his rule, and he'd threaten to destroy humanity if any dissented, which is obviously what they did in the show. Regardless, Shadow isn't really doing any of this out of loyalty to Doom. It's just a fit of nihilistic rage. The episode would end, showing the planet from space, fading into a lifeless rock. Okay, now for the true ending. After Shadow takes the Chaos Emerald from Dr. Eggman, he doesn't kill him. Omega wants to, but Shadow tells him to save Zamo. He says Eggman is highly egotistical, and if he truly wants to get revenge, they should destroy his pride. And the best way to do this would be to help Gunn defeat the Black Arms, and then put Eggman in prison. Omega agrees to this, but Dr. Eggman manages to escape using his Eggmobile. So Shadow and Omega decide to save him for later, and go to the Gun Fortress, where they are promptly arrested. Gun recognizes Omega as Eggman's robot, and they know Shadow massacred their soldiers in Westopolis, but they aren't aware that Shadow is the one who murdered the president, if he does it at all. The commander is informed that the two want to help defeat the Black Arms. Against the protests of his subordinates, the commander takes them in, forming Team Dark. Now, if you notice, Team Dark does not include Rouge like in the games. This is something I would be reluctantly willing to change. Yes, you would think a show about Shadow would naturally include the woman who has a crush on him, but honestly, I don't really think Rouge would fit in. Unlike Shadow, Omega, and Dr. Eggman, Rouge is not a native of Earth in any way whatsoever, and so her presence would probably cause time to slow to a stop like what happened in Season 2 of Sonic X. In addition, I can't imagine her contributing anything significant to the plot other than being Shadow's crutch.
You mean crush?
I know what I said. I might put Chris in Team Dark to take Rouge's place. He could act as the brains of the group due to his background in engineering. If I did include Rouge in the show, I might have her be a stowaway on the Egg Fleet as they are traveling to Chris's world, and Eggman would give her her own nightclub in Night Babylon as a form of hush money. Club Rouge, it would be called, like the one from Sonic Battle. It would be this classy, speakeasy type place for rich folks. I think that would fit her character well. Anyway, the next few episodes would be a saga where Team Dark works with Gunn to obtain the other Chaos Emeralds. First, they would get the one Black Doom is using to power his flying fortress, which they would then blow up with a time bomb. This would be the point Black Doom realizes Shadow's betrayal of him, which he would be furious about. Next, they would get the one the terrorist group had. Then, they would get the one owned by the hostile nation, and after, they would get the one from the more neutral nation. And as they secure each new emerald, Shadow would become more and more disillusioned with Gunn. Because first they were just fighting the Black Arms, this force of absolute evil. But now they're fighting other humans, and some that don't even consider them enemies. Finally, they would get the last Chaos Emerald from Dr. Eggman, the one that they didn't take from him before. There would be a full-scale assault on Eggman's base involving thousands of gun soldiers and a big final showdown between Team Dark and Dr. Eggman and his egg dealer. In the end, Team Dark would win, and the MPs would seize Dr. Eggman, Boko, and Deco. By the time Shadow delivers the last Chaos Emerald to the Gun Commander, he's curious about what Gun plans to do now that they have all 7. The Gun Commander, very much mincing words, essentially admits Gun will use the Chaos Emeralds as a deterrent in order to maintain the world order. Shadow seriously questions whether or not Maria would have wanted a world ruled by fear instead of love. Just before he can make his decision about whether or not he should hand over the emerald, Black Doom breaks in through the wall of the base, furious at Shadow for his betrayal. When Black Doom appears, the Gun Commander immediately orders all the soldiers to open fire at him. But to Black Doom, their bullets are like pebbles. He demands Shadow explain why he betrayed him, and Shadow tells Black Doom that he already knows he's not the real Shadow. Chris is shocked by this at first, but he comes to reject the idea, pointing out that Shadow remembered certain things about his past during the Metarex saga. The Gun Commander would say that, if perchance Shadow is the real Shadow, then he needs to keep his promise to Maria, and protect the planet from those aliens who want to destroy it. Black Doom would laugh, and claim the Black Arms don't want to destroy humanity, but save humanity from their own self-destruction. Humanity is greedy, power-hungry, and violent towards their own kind, and left to their own devices, they'll destroy themselves. But the Black Arms will bring order to the planet. They'll free humanity of war, famine, poverty, and illness by imprisoning them in human batteries, harvesting their bioelectricity as an energy source, sort of like the machines did in the Matrix. Honestly, now that I think about it, did Shadow the Hedgehog just copy the Matrix for their story? Needless to say, Shadow would not be convinced this is what Maria would have wanted, and he would not give the emerald to Black Doom. Black Doom would express disapproval, but he'd simply place his hand on Shadow's Chaos Emerald and invoke Chaos Control anyway. This would teleport the section of Eggman's base they were all on onto the Black Comet, and would teleport the Black Comet to Earth just above Central City. Shadow would be surprised that Black Doom has Chaos powers too. Since Shadow brought all 7 Chaos Emeralds to one place, Black Doom would now reveal the truth of his past to him, so that hopefully he will understand why he owes his loyalty to the Black Arms. And so he begins his evil monologue. Thousands of years ago, the Black Arms made contact with a race of water elementals, the Ancients. The Ancients came from the planet where the Chaos Emeralds came from. You see, the Chaos Emeralds don't actually come from Sonic's universe, but they don't technically come from this one either. Rather, they're unique objects that have been regularly passed between universes throughout eternity, so they have no clear origin, at least none that could be known with any certainty. During their time on the Ancients' planet, they had sustained life and made their civilization a utopia. They learned how to tap into the Chaos Force and use Chaos Control. But one day, they had to flee their planet when some kind of cosmological anomaly threatened to annihilate their solar system. They used the emeralds to power their spaceship, which gave it the ability to travel faster than light and even traverse different dimensions. The Black Arms and the Ancients were initially cordial with one another. The Ancients gave them access to all kinds of Chaos Emerald technology and taught them to use Chaos Control. But they had a falling out due to differences in intentions. The Ancients simply sought refuge on other planets to continue their species' existence, while the Black Arms sought conquest. Since the Chaos Emeralds allowed them to travel any distance instantaneously, the Black Arms would have used them to expand their galactic empire across the entire universe. Seeing their evil intentions, the Ancients caused Chaos Control, sending them and the Chaos Emeralds into a parallel universe, one that would eventually be Sonic's. Thousands of years later, the Black Arms would discover the planet Earth. and the space colony Ark orbiting it. There, Professor Gerald Robotnik was working on creating the ultimate life form, a creature that was immune to all diseases, so that he could use its DNA to cure his granddaughter's condition. Black Doom met with Professor Gerald and recognized his genius, believing he might be able to find a way to traverse dimensions and bring the Chaos Emeralds back. So, he made a deal with him. He would allow the professor to use his stem cells to bioengineer this ultimate life form, and in return, Professor Gerald would invent a device that could allow travel into the universe the Ancients brought the Chaos Emeralds to, and task this ultimate life form with bringing the Chaos Emeralds back. Evidently, Professor Gerald did succeed in making contact with the other world, which explains how his grandson, Dr. Eggman, ended up there. I'm not exactly sure to what extent Gerald should have the ability to travel between the worlds. If he could easily travel between the two, it could be explained he found these anthropomorphic animals living there and decided to base his design for the ultimate life form on one, which explains why Shadow is a hedgehog. In fact, if you want to get really autistic, Professor Gerald could even have used Sonic himself as a module, since time on Sonic's world passes at a 12th of the time of the speed on Earth. That makes 50 years of Earth time equivalent to 4 years of time on Sonic's world. But that might get confusing, because that would mean all those months Chris lived in Sonic's world, years were passing on his own world. So, whatever. Thus, Shadow the Hedgehog was created. And even if the Shadow is a mere clone of the original Shadow, it doesn't change the fact that Black Doom's blood courses through his veins. This is why he can use Chaos Control. And also, Black Doom reasons, this makes Shadow his son. The Gun Commander would then tell Shadow not to listen to him, and to remain loyal to Gun. After all, Gun's mission is to keep world peace, which is what Maria would have wanted. Then Dr. Eggman would pipe in, asserting that since Shadow is a clone that he created, he belongs to him. At this point, Shadow would feel very torn, not knowing whose side he should take. But Chris would tell him that all of them just want to use him for their own gain, and that he should live for himself and no one else. So, Shadow stands up for himself, proclaiming that he has done away with his past, and no one can tell him what to do anymore. This shocks the Gun Commander and Dr. Eggman, but Black Doom tells Shadow he very much can tell him what to do. Since Shadow was made using his blood, he has the power to control his actions. He never did that up to this point because he wanted to give Shadow an opportunity to submit to him of his own volition. Shadow involuntarily begins opening his hand, prompting the gun soldiers to raise their weapons again. But before any of them can fire, they all get hit with the gas that makes them all freeze. Black Doom then summons his death leeches to eat them. Boko and Deco would then start panicking, but Dr. Eggman would remind them that, since they're robots, the gas won't affect them. Then, he would whisper something inaudibly into their, robot ears. The two of them would then start tiptoeing away. Black Doom would explain he needed the Chaos Emeralds in order to teleport the Black Comet past the Van Allen belt surrounding the planet, as crossing it normally would fry their circuits. And now that it's been circumvented, they can begin their conquest of Earth. After giving his evil monologue, suddenly, Bokan would fly in with a message for Shadow. He would hand the message over to Black Doom so he could show it to everyone who was frozen. The TV would turn on, showing none other than Professor Gerald himself. The professor would explain he knew the government was planning to shut down the Ark, and he likely would never see Shadow again after that, so he recorded a message and programmed the space colony Ark to automatically send this signal to every radio and television in the world if it ever detected the Black Comet was no longer orbiting the sun. He would then explain the regretful deal he made with Black Doom over 50 years ago. But, after Black Doom helped him create Shadow, he built the Eclipse Cannon for the purpose of destroying the Black Comet. We know, of course, he later went insane and tried to use them to destroy Earth. But he needed the 7 Chaos Emeralds in order to power it. So, Gerald says, Shadow's true purpose is to gather the 7 Chaos Emeralds, like Black Doom said, but not for the purpose of helping him. rather for the purpose of destroying him. And of course, Maria would pop in at the end of the tape just to pull at Shadow's heartstrings a little. Black Doom would laugh and call Gerald a fool because now he has the emeralds. But then, as always happens with Bokun, the TV would explode, causing Black Doom to lose his control of Shadow. Then, Deco would fly in with the Eggmobile, gunning down all the Death Leeches. The Eggmobile would be carrying a prison egg that Bokun was standing inside. Upon descending, the prison egg would open up, and Boko would begin carrying all the frozen bodies on board. Furious, Black Doom would use the Chaos Emeralds to transform into Devil Doom. To his surprise, because of his blood connection to Shadow, his transformation simultaneously caused Shadow to transform into his own super form. And I'm sure you can see where this all goes from here. There's an epic final battle between Super Shadow and Devil Doom aboard the Black Comet. During their battle, Dr. Eggman and Gunn would work together to ready the Eclipse Cannon. They would send Chris up into space to handle it, while Dr. Eggman and Gunn would give support to Super Shadow. At one point, Devil Doom would seemingly beat Shadow, and would taunt him by saying that, even if he's the ultimate life form on Earth, all he is an inferior copy of himself, the ultimate life form of the galaxy. Then, right before Doom would deliver the finishing blow, Dr. Eggman would shield him using another one of his battle suits. I'm leaning towards using the Egg Emperor for this one, because in the game, this one had a giant shield, and it looks more threatening than the Egg Breaker or the Egg Dealer. Or maybe this battle suit could be anime exclusive, I don't know. Anyway, Eggman would shield him with the battle suit, saying he couldn't let Shadow die without knowing the truth. See, back in episode 38, when Shadow removed his limiters so that he could stop Space Colony Ark from crashing into Earth, he had exhausted all of his energy and was left nearly dead, floating in orbit. But Eggman, not being able to bear the thought of losing his grandfather's greatest creation, left the Ark and scoured for him in the Eggmobile. He then brought him to safety back on Earth. Then he created a special capsule that would keep Shadow alive until he recovered, and as a failsafe, he collected some of his DNA so he could make clones of him. He never used any of them because they were all inferior to the real Shadow. He expected the real Shadow to take about a year to recover, but when the Metarex attacked Sonic and friends on the planet Hobodon, Shadow was released from the capsule a month early, which resulted in him losing his memory. So, Shadow was the real Shadow all along. After saying this, Devil Doom would easily destroy the Egg Emperor in a single blow, but this knowledge would give Super Shadow the strength he needed to finish the fight. In the end, of course, Super Shadow would defeat Devil Doom, explaining that Professor Gerald created him to surpass Black Doom rather than be an inferior copy of him. Then he would fly underneath the comet and literally throw it into space. Chris, aboard the Ark, would see the Black Comet shooting up from Earth, but Black Doom still has the Chaos Emeralds, so he wouldn't be able to power the Eclipse Cannon. Super Shadow would then teleport aboard the Ark and would loan his Chaos Energy to power it instead. Chris would then fire the cannon, blowing up the Black Comet and killing Black Doom and all of his forces. Now, I'm not totally sure what the best resolution would be. One I considered was, after destroying the Black Comet, Shadow feels deep regret for having sided with them. Because even though he saved the planet, he still killed tons of gun soldiers, and he can't bring them back. And when you assassinate a character to that extent, you really can't redeem them. Chris would suggest that, although Shadow has proven himself to be a menace to this world, he might fit in better on Sonic's world. He could start his life over there and live for himself. Shadow would like this idea, and would use the 7 Chaos Emeralds to send himself to Sonic's world. I also think it would be funny to have him do it right in front of the Gun Commander and Dr. Eggman just to make them angry. You know, because they spent this entire series trying to collect the Chaos Emeralds, and now they're all gone. Eggman, Boko, and Deco would get sent to prison, and since Washington, D.C. was destroyed, Chris would be back at the Thorndike Manor taking classes online while his university is being rebuilt. There would be some tender moments as he sees his family again, as well as Helen. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Chris's family and friends would definitely be in this story. His family not so much, since he's a legal adult now, but his friends for sure. Danny would be his best buddy, both of them would be in Gun together. I'm not sure if I'd put Francine in Gun. She's kind of a tomboy, so it'd be fitting, I guess. But I was also thinking of having her be a goth girl. Like the kind who's into emo rock and paranormal stuff. I just think having a hot goth chick is obligatory in an anime about Shadow. I think the ending would be solid if it weren't for one minor detail. It had been established at the beginning of the show travel between Chris's world and Sonic's world is no longer possible. And I don't want to make up some kind of bullcrap like, oh, the quantum alignment has already happened again, now there's no problem. Like, no. One of the things that made the final episode of Sonic X so sad was the permanence of the events. Cosmo died in that episode, something pretty brutal for a 4-kids show. And Chris, after having spent 6 years trying to find a way to visit Sonic's world, he finds that all this travel that had been happening was the result of a cosmic fluke that may never happen again. Or if it does, it might not be for thousands of years after they die. For all intents and purposes, this is the last adventure he's ever going to have with Sonic. But then again, since Shadow is taking Sonic's place in this anime, I think it would be fitting to have a farewell moment at the end of it. Another ending I considered was Shadow stays in Chris's world, but Team Dark breaks away from Gun and becomes an independent fighting force, fighting for world peace. It would have its own commander who would give missions to Shadow, Omega, and possibly Rouge, all while providing them with logistical support. I like this ending because it creates a nice segue into a potential next season. If Sonic X did manage to get a second season, the next one would star Sonic again, and it would be an adaptation of Sonic 06. I remember back when all the Sonic X Season 4 rumors were still sorta kinda believable, people were predicting that it was going to be about Sonic 06. So I think that's the only real path for this season. But one of the plot elements of Sonic 06 that many fans found nonsensical, or weird at the very least, is right after the events of Shadow the Hedgehog, Team Dark is working for Gun, the organization that made his life a living hell. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but in order for the next season plot to work, there still has to be some kind of entity that's sending Team Dark on missions. After all, Shadow has to have some kind of motivation for acquiring the Scepter of Darkness at the beginning. But there are some obvious problems with doing a Sonic 06 adaptation in Sonic X, so I would probably want some creative help with this one. I'm not sure which of these two endings is better. Maybe I'd do neither, I don't know. But yeah, that's basically how I would do Sonic X Season 4 if it were left up to me. I'm hoping one day I can do a video similar to this one, but about how I would adapt Sonic 06 to Sonic X. I know my last Sonic 06 fanfic video wasn't outstandingly detailed, so maybe I could develop it a bit more. Also, for those who have been keeping up with my Silver the Hedgehog fanfic on DeviantArt, I know, I haven't uploaded a chapter in months. I've been trying to speed through my last year of university, so I've been kinda slacking with that. The pages have already been drawn and inked for a while. It's just a matter of coloring them at this point. And if there are any artists out there, I would love to collaborate with you guys. Maybe we could do something together. I think that'd be a lot of fun. But anyway, that's the end of this video, and I'll catch you all next time.